West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
Good morning to those of you in the hall, and good afternoon from Linlithgow, Scotland. John McKechnie here, welcoming you to our gathering today. This morning, I learned that Scotland had won their game last night at Boston and would at least be in with a shout for continuing the World Cup. So while I'm not a big football fan, I'm in somewhat celebratory mood this morning. So welcome to you all, whether you are near or far. Thank you for taking the time to be with us at West Hill. And this morning we have a guest speaker, Alison, and he will be speaking to us later. Alison is waving to us, so good morning, Alison. Good. Let me move on now to our land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather at 62 Orchard Park Drive is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and was previously occupied by the Huron, Wendat and Seneca First Nations. The land is covered by Treaty 20 and the Williams Treaties of 1923 and lies within the lands of the Protected Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement of 1701, an Indigenous citizenship law made between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations in 1701 that extends from Montreal to Fort Erie. One of the core values within the idea of a dish with one spoon is that those who use the land should not abuse the land. Individuals and groups should only take what they need from the land so that there will be a healthy, long-term, sustainable environment. All participants in the agreement or treaty had the responsibility to ensure the dish would never be empty by taking care of the land and all of the living beings on it. We invite you to visit a First Nation, attend a powwow, and stay for the great feast wherein everyone is welcomed and expected to partake of the food that is generously offered to visitors, all in good fellowship. And now, announcements and minute spots. If anybody in the hall has any announcements, you can step up to the podium just now.
Aaron is going to speak about Moosehide.
Thank you. Aaron, do you wish to take the floor?
No, we got it. I have a loud voice, but they won't hear me in Scotland. I'm just showing off what we got for the front. Barb had a sign out front to welcome people to West Hill that she made herself, and it served us well. But we're moving on, and this is going to be our front door sign. I checked the QR code. It actually comes to our website, not somebody else's, so that's good. And I just wanted to show that off, that we're going to be putting that out front. I didn't put it outside. It's raining here in Scarborough today, so I didn't want to find out right away if the colors run or not, so maybe we'll put it out next week. I'm back. So I believe I'm the anchor. I believe I'm the last talker about the Moose Hide campaign. What I wanted to do today is tell a little bit of a story, a personal story about how two pretty significant events in my life track back to this campaign and my ongoing support for it. We don't have the clicker this morning, so we're just sort of trying to see. We'll just skip that one. So those of you who aren't from Canada may not have the full history, or you're getting tired of hearing about it maybe, but this was said by our Prime Minister of Canada. This is a direct quote. "When the school is on the reserve, the child lives with its parents, who are savages. He is simply a savage who can read and write. Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from their parental influence." If that's not a more clear description of intentional genocide, I don't know what we're going to, cultural genocide, that we'll ever experience. So imagine in Canada, we have this 80-year swipe where children were taken away from the growth of their parents. Their parents weren't able to raise them between the ages of 7 and 16. That went on for 80 years, last residential school closing in Canada in 1996, which is incredibly recent. They tried to erase an entire culture. And those of us who are sort of like 50 plus probably remember that's not the story we were told. We weren't told that story. We were told that these people were given free education, and they always balked at it. We were told that they don't have to pay taxes, and they have all the opportunity in the world to grow businesses and live tax-free within Canada. It wasn't until, next slide, please. So it wasn't until about 2005, I was reading an article in the Toronto Star where they started telling all the stories about the residential schools and what they actually were, which were basically prisons with children in them. This is the actual article I was reading. I remember where I was. I was in the Williams Coffee Pub right by the airport. I was a police officer at the time. I remember reading this article over coffee, and I just went silent because the Prime Minister at the time, who was, the de facto head of the government, and the RCMP is a federal agency, the Prime Minister was saying, we don't have a problem with women and girls being treated any differently on reserves or by other men than we do in the rest of the population. At the same time, this reconciliation piece is coming out, where I look at that piece with a little bit of bias, where I'm like, okay, so yeah, this is a newspaper, they're going to try and make it heartfelt, blah, blah, blah. And so I read the article, I'm like, that's really bad, what happened there? And then I saw the raw numbers, the number of interviewers, and that they were wanting to keep all the interviews private because they were incredibly detailed. And I was just shocked. There's no way that 800 people got together in a conspiracy to do this. That's where I realized what the residential schools were and how they came to be. And the residential schools, next, yeah. So this is my conflict. That's me on, you're right. And then the RCMP history is on the other side, where we were actually the brutes. We were the ones that went into the reserves and it wasn't even reserves sometimes, just Indigenous communities, ripped the children from them and sent them off to residential schools. So I had an internal conflict about, oh man, I'm part of an agency that's completely oppressive in this role. So the RCMP went on a reconciliation tour, and they may or may not have changed depending on who you talk to. The next thing that happened with me, well, that's just a summary. Maybe I'll put up on the web later. Keep moving. This is boring. Boring. Next. Next. I'm trying to get somewhere. Next. There we go. Okay. So the next piece of this is when we adopted my daughter, Isabella. We started the process to adopt Isabella, and about literally 2 weeks in, we got a call from Children's Aid, and they said, oh, by the way, she's Indigenous. And we're like, okay, what does that mean? And they're like, it means it's going to have to go to the Indigenous Children's Aid Society to take care of. And then our entire family went on a reconciliation path to understand that Indigenous kids being adopted by white families has a history. Add in the layer that I'm a Mountie at the time. And there's a lot of reservation in the Indigenous Children's Aid Society about maybe this isn't going to be a good fit. But we went through it and everybody agreed, and Bella wanted to live with us, so the adoption went through. But the learning that when, in the typical federal government way, that when they can't win one way, they try to win another way. Residential schools were exposed, they got shut down, everybody realized that's not going to work. The power shifted to the Children's Aid Societies. And that's where the 60 Scoop came along, where instead of taking them to schools, they just literally kidnapped them, put them in Children's Aid Societies, and they got adopted by white families. Everybody well-meaning in the white family stuff where there's like, we're trying to do our part, but the Children's Aid Societies were like, nope, we can just take the children because they're not living to what we suspect is our standard, even though it's just a difference, not really a standard change. So fast forward now in 2021, we're adopting Bella, and we're trying to understand why does the Indigenous Children's Aid Society have such reservation about this? Well, now I understand. So that was our path through all this, that we understood, me being a Mountie, us adopting Bella, understanding how important the Moose High campaign is, that people are men and boys, and generally communities like ours, are going to stand up with the Indigenous people, follow their lead, and do what we can to start reversing this. Thanks.
Today's readings are taken from a book by James Hollis called The Middle Passage, and they are specifically excerpts from chapter 6, which is entitled On the High Seas and Alone. And by way of introduction, this section is about each of us being called to individuate, to become different to what we are now, though not all will hear or heed that. If we do not tend to our own process, our own journey, we risk denying the life forces which led to our birth and losing our sense of meaning. As long as we're on the high seas of the soul anyway, why not be as conscious and as courageous as possible? This final chapter presents a series of attitudes and practices which anyone can employ. The usefulness of a formal therapeutic relation notwithstanding, what follows is for those who may not choose to enter therapy, as well as for those who do. So there are several sections here, and I will do my best to ensure that I remember to explain what the heading is. So we start with a section entitled From Loneliness to Solitude. The American poet Marianne Moore once wrote that the best cure for loneliness is solitude. What does she mean? What is the difference between loneliness and solitude? Loneliness is not a contemporary discovery, nor is the flight from it. The 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal observed in his Pensées that the jester was invented to divert the king for loneliness, for king though he may be, if he thinks of self, he would grow vexed and anxious. So, Pascal argued, all of modern culture was a vast divertissement to keep us from loneliness and from thinking of self. Similarly, Nietzsche wrote 100 years ago, "When we are alone and quiet, we are afraid that something will be whispered in our ear, and so we hate the silence and drug ourselves with social life." One cannot begin to heal or engage one's own soulfulness without a keen appreciation of the relationship to self. To achieve this requires solitude, that psychic state wherein one is wholly present to oneself. Following are some of the issues which must be confronted if one is to move from loneliness to solitude. First of all, absorbing the trauma of separation. It is difficult to fully appreciate either the trauma of birth, which is primal separation, or the full effects of the parent-child relationship. The more beneficent that relationship, the more one will be self-sufficient and comfortable with solitude. Paradoxically, the more troubled the relationship to the parent, the more dependent the person will be on relationships in general. The more volatile the parental environment, the more one learns self-definition only in terms of the other. Jung puts parents in a difficult spot when he wrote that they should always be conscious of the fact that they themselves are the principal cause of neurosis in their children. This is cited here not to instill guilt in parents, but to remind us of just how much we have been defined by them and by parents' substitutes, such as social institutions. To move to the necessary solitude in which individuation can proceed, one must consciously ask each day, in what way am I so afraid that I am avoiding myself, my own journey? The codependent adult has learned to avoid his or her own being. The cliche, to get in touch with one's feelings, really asks us to define ourselves from an inner reality rather than an outer context. We must further ask of our responses to others, where is the parent lurking here? Then we may operate out of integrity. The more traumatic the childhood, the more infantile our sense of reality. It is very hard to know our reality and to operate from its baseline. Risking loneliness to achieve that sense of oneness with oneself, we call solitude, is essential if one is to survive the middle passage. Loss and the withdrawal of projections. Great losses often occur at midlife. Children move away, a friend dies, divorce devastates. The loss of that necessary other can be as existentially terrifying as the loss of the parent would be to the child. The loss creates not only angst, but a loss of identity. A popular song laments, "Can't live if living is without you." What this tells us is how much of our lives have been caught up in the projections of meaning and identity onto the other, be it spouse, child, or persona. Yes, some people feel liberated by a divorce or the departure of a child, but many do not. What is essential to honour the relationship by feeling its loss, and yet recognise that one has had all along a commitment larger than any single relationship. A person who has suffered loss and the withdrawal of projections will have struggled with the dependencies which haunt us all, but also will have asked the next question: how much of the unknown me was tied up in that person or that role? When we can acknowledge loss and recoup the energy that was once invested outside ourselves, it becomes available next stage of the journey. And we move on to ritualizing fear. People so fear loneliness that they will cling to terrible relationships and constricting professions rather than risk the consequences of letting go of the other. In the end, there is no substitute for the courage necessary to confront loneliness. The something Nietzsche suggested we feared hearing may be useful and liberating, but we will never hear that inner voice unless we risk solitude. For some, it helps to devise a daily ritual of private meaning which obliges us to sit quietly with no phone, no children, nothing, and listen to the silence. Such a ritual at first may seem strained and artificial, but sticking to it will allow the silence to speak. When we are not lonely in being alone, then we have achieved solitude. Fear keeps us from this essential meeting with ourselves. The purpose of a ritual is to link a person to the larger rhythms of life. As they are passed from generation to generation, rituals become routine and lose their original power. All the more reason, then, for the individual to generate a ritual of personal significance, investing it with the same energy previously given to dependencies. The goal is to still the traffic of the mind, the neurotic clutter which floods and distracts. If we are afraid of being alone, afraid of silence, then we can never really be present to ourselves. Self-alienation is very much the condition of the modern world, and it can only be changed by individual action. So, some part of every day, it is good to risk radical presence to oneself, to follow a quiet ritual of disengagement from the traffic out there and the traffic in here. When the silence speaks, one has gained companionship with oneself, moved from loneliness to solitude, a necessary prerequisite to individuation. This is offered as wisdom for the journey. May we walk in its light. Today we welcome Alison Brooks-Starks as our speaker. Alison is a ministry school dropout, an outdoor educator, and a modern-day Thoreau. His longest stretch of intentional solitude was a 28-day paddle along the North Saskatchewan River from Edmonton, Alberta, to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Ask him about the geese. He can be reached at his landline. Alison joins us today to talk about being alone in the high seas. He gives us an invite to reflect on learning to live with the loss of things and people who gave our lives meaning. Please join me in extending a warm West Hill welcome to Alison Brooks-Starks.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. It feels like I should have a long time ago. I've met Greta and Scott back in the day at SSUC. I'm quite connected to SSUC. We do our ecotherapy offerings through Southminster Steinhauer, or Spiritual Seekers United in Community here in Edmonton. So it kind of feels like we've always been connected in some way. So I'm glad to get to you today. So hello. Here we go. So I'm a big fan of solitude. Not loneliness, you hear? No one's a big fan of that. We all get too much of that. I'm talking about intentional, positive solitude. When I'm alone, I can really connect to the real me. So I read a bit about solitude, and I came across that chapter you just heard about solitude by a Jungian analyst who's quite readable for a Jungian, I think. I think it's tremendous stuff, Dr. James Hollis. So this middle passage from misery to meaning in midlife. I'll remind you of a little bit about what you just heard, a couple lines again here. He writes, great losses often occur at midlife. Children move away, a friend dies, divorce devastates. One cannot begin to heal or engage one's own soulfulness without a keen appreciation of relationship to the self. To achieve this requires solitude, that psychic state wherein one is wholly present to oneself. So I wonder if you have found that in solitude, or if you can imagine you might find that when by yourself, that being alone is an important way of knowing ourselves. For Hollis, he's firm about it. He writes that solitude is necessary to get through the trials of midlife or other life crises. Well, Hollis, we might protest. Be that as it may. Nice as all that sounds, Hollis. Solitude is scary. No, thank you, good sir. Scary to find out what thoughts and worries might come up when alone. Scary because, well, loneliness can feel like a literal pain in the chest, a graspy, breathless feeling to be quickly filled with texting and scrolling and true crime podcasts and CBC radio, as it happens, and ideas. Neil Cooksall, Nala Ayed, save me from my empty evenings. But never fear. Hollis here has, as you've heard, outlined 3 recommendations. 3 skills to take the scary out of being alone. Because in solitude, we can really meet our true selves and get on with this middle passage business. 1 skill is to practice, of course. You heard it called ritualize fear, which is nice and hardcore compared to practice. So 1 skill is to practice bite-sized chunks of solitude, as he writes, risking radical presence to oneself. Another of these 3 skills is to work on the tough feelings of separation. But the one we're going to look at today, the one I want to go deeper on today, is to be able to, the skill to be able to tolerate and then flourish in solitude, be able to tolerate and flourish in midlife or in life. We must, here it is, that 3rd skill, we must be able to deal with loss, especially of the people and things that gave our lives meaning. Be able to deal with loss, especially of the people and things that gave our lives meaning. Okay, let's begin. Well, now we're doing that. So this is the real beginning. Let's begin. I sit before you today as someone who can do only one thing truly extremely well. I really only know how to do this one thing, and that is the 50, 100, and 200 meter breaststroke. And I must say, it's not a skill that comes in handy day to day. You asked me here today to share my perspective, to get you thinking, when really you should have asked for breaststroke. So we're back in 2007. I'm a high performance athlete, swimming varsity breaststroke at university. Every spare hour since I was a kid was spent splashing back and forth, faster, ever faster, a second shaved off here, a few tenths of a second taken off there. That's me, a swimmer. It's who I am. But then, who am I when swimming is done? And of course, at a certain point, it was done. And I did indeed have quite a major identity crisis, trying to figure out who I was, if not a swimmer. Be able to deal with loss, especially of the people and things that gave our lives meaning. Who are you beyond the roles you play, the jobs you have? So then we're in 2010, and my mom has stage 4 colon cancer. And then, as mothers have the audacity to do, Even though it doesn't seem like it could ever really be possible, she dies. She does die. Mums shouldn't do that. So then after, who am I? Who am I if not caregiver? Who am I if not worried? Griever sees me through for a nice long stretch. And maybe you have felt this too. It was surprising to find out that even such a grief does fade. Who am I then? Be able to deal with loss, especially of the people and things that gave our lives meaning. Who are you beyond the identities you get from others? And now, 2024, just a couple of years ago, I'm a new parent. 2 kids, but I gave birth to the second little one. And I'm also a partner for 10 years. And when that partnership is floundering, when we're partners in name and identity only, not in action, I cling to that label ever more strongly. This is an identity that I refuse to let be stripped away from me. I'm a stayer. I'm a fixer. I will make this work. And it turns out I can't. And it doesn't. So then a divorce level breakup, learning to co-parent kids who are now in 2 households. No, that can't be right. That can't be me. That's not me. That's not me. But it is, I guess. Be able to deal with loss, especially of the people and things that gave our lives meaning. So here I am right now, today, and life has that habit of handing you a major crisis every once in a while. But sometimes in a weird way, I kind of like it. I do nowadays. And I'll tell you why. But first, let's just position ourselves again. We spoke about how solitude is crucial because in positive time alone, you can hear your true self, or maybe even find your true self, or find your true self again. Solitude is important always, but especially critical in seasons like these. Quitting your sport, your mom dying, divorce, and the midlife crisis, the middle passage. Those examples, all the other biggies. But to be alone in times like these feels too risky because you know you're going to have some bananarama huge insights. And what if those insights are scary? So today we're looking at how to bust through the fear, to be able to face ourselves, by ourselves, and maybe learn a thing or two about ourselves. We've been exploring here through these examples, how do we find our identity separate from the roles we play? When other people, jobs, or circumstance bestow our lives with meaning, what happens when we lose that person or job or thing? Does the meaning go away? Does the self go away? I mean, sort of. It does kind of feel like that. And it does feel that terrible. So is there a way to avoid that? Yes, let's get into it. You've heard of the word persona, the mask, the role, the character we take on in different contexts. So personas, you act differently with your kids than you do at work, or with this friend or that friend, or with your partner. Your persona is your public image, your social role. You're probably in your church persona right now. I certainly am. I decided I'll sit by these books. That will make the persona that I want to give out. Maybe you're in your Zoom persona. There was that kind of COVID pandemic classic where your persona is a work shirt and your true self is no pants. So, do I have pants on? You will never know. Yes, I have pants on. So your church persona probably has the characteristics of being polite, a little bit fake extroverted at coffee time. Maybe your church persona is a bit held together. Like maybe we can clap to the music if we're feeling really rowdy. And your church persona is probably a version of yourself that sits pretty still. Even though some of you, your true selves, have the impulse right now to walk out or at least wiggle a little bit. Being in persona is okay. It's great, even. We are all quite fine with you not being right now your at home, closer to true self, which I assume is you swearing like a sailor as you burn your fingers, pulling the quiche out of the oven, music blaring, swaying around the kitchen in your housecoat. So yes, it's absolutely okay to not be 100% yourself 100% of the time. Please don't. But the risk of persona, this version that we're acting in right now a little bit, is when we start to believe that's the real me and lose touch with the core self underneath. Because if those things go away, the job or that person dies, our persona dies with them. If that part of us only existed because of that other person, then our identity, or what we thought was our identity, goes away too. It's stripped away unceremoniously. So, for example, if I'm locked into the role that parent equals me, that role gives my life meaning and importance and value and worth. Who will I be when the kids move out? And that loss of them moving out will be all the more devastating with an added identity loss on top of it if I forgot to attend to a more complete picture of myself. Taking time alone once in a while to remember the full, real me aside from the kids. So trying to pull back from our personas in advance of loss becomes helpful work. Becoming awake and aware of the performances we play in different contexts. In our roles with others, we don't even have to work on ourselves much. When my mom died, my dad said it was like half his brain was gone. And as you might feel for yourself, this really happens in a marriage or a partnership. Maybe she'll take care of all the feelings for the team, for the couple. He can do all the thinking, or maybe she does all the thinking and he does the execution of the plans. Or maybe one person falls into the role of holding all the anxiety while the other balances out the family with all the fixing. When in fact, we all could be whole. All these characteristics could exist in all of us. They do exist in all of us. We just let ourselves off the hook from becoming whole because we've locked ourselves into pattern ways of being, and we want other people around us to stay locked into their roles too. So the losses that inevitably come for us all will be easier to manage if we are more grounded in a true, full, rich version of ourselves. And you can do this work after loss as well, taking time to really feel it, really be with our grief, not only honors the relationship, but helps us gain the learning that we can take forward. So back to one of my examples, if my identity was dependent on a partner and we break up, what would stop me from falling right back into those patterns with someone else? Finding a very similar person or situation to keep me comfortable, let me live out my usual persona. But if I really feel the loss, really sit with it, live alongside it, work with it, go inward, even harness the crisis to learn about myself, maybe I can grow and move forward anew, changed, closer to my true self. That's what I'm trying to do right now in my new relationship. I'm working so hard to notice and talk about the patterns that I'm tempted to fall back into, all the comfortable personas of years before. I want new ways that are more aligned with the real me. So, in fact, I'm kind of trying to stay in crisis or stay with this newness, this in between time. All my recent opportunities for waking up, that breakup, my pregnancy and birth, they all brought up a ton of hard and interesting things. And absolutely, loss and change are awful. Hollis is always good for that. He he's his language is, you heard him say it. It's existentially terrifying. But there's so much to learn through those tough times. They're rich fodder for becoming larger, more whole, more authentic. And in contrast to existential terror, I have another author's take here. His name's Gay Hendricks. Hendricks writes, as you go about your discoveries, you'll benefit from adopting an attitude of wonder. Being lighthearted will help you make progress faster than if you criticize yourself for every little thing. When I maintain an attitude of cheerful wonder and keen interest towards my faults and flaws, I see them dissolve and transform much more rapidly than when I give myself a hard time about them. If you're willing to adopt a playful attitude towards yourself and your shortcomings, you can make extraordinarily rapid progress. It's easier to chuckle over things than to fret over them, and chuckling is much more fun for the people around you. Lighthearted wonder. So I keep trying to seek the deepest truths about life. I'm trying to do my seeking in the spirit of play, not work. So that's Hendricks. I always try to balance out my Hollis with a little bit of Hendricks. He makes spending time with inner work sound pretty darn nice. And it can be. It gets easier and easier. The persona dropping stuff that we're looking at today, one of those 3 skills for learning to take the solitude out of scary, it really builds on itself. Here's what I mean. It's less scary to turn to solitude if you know your true self. You know you, so you know you're great to hang out with alone. And if you spend time alone, it's easier to find that cool person. So it's like a catch-22 in a good way. More solitude, more knowing self. More knowing self, easier solitude. So an offering, if you wish, we could notice our personas. How would we do that? Detective time. Poirot, the little gray cells. Watch for clues. Your biggest clue, honestly, is being grumpy. If you do something and it makes you grumpy, it probably wasn't the true you. It was you in persona, like your fake version. Even helping. If helping makes your blood boil, then that particular act of helping probably was out of alignment with who you really are. So being grumpy, feeling frozen, a tight chest, a lump in the throat, wishing to run, looking for clues that things aren't resonating, aren't in alignment with your true self. You don't have to change anything. You could just notice and start to wonder if that isn't really you. Such bravery will vastly benefit when it comes to dealing with loss, we're told today by Hollis, and in building the courage to look within. So to finish off here, existential terror of loss in self and others met with an attitude of wonder. Sounds fun. Thanks very much for having me.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.